Mr. Dyer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to share my screen.
So how do I mute myself?
And I trust people can both hear me and see the title page of a slide deck.
No one has addressed.
Okay. So I'm going to start working through this. So there's two parts to the slide deck. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly. There's not a huge amount of material here, but I thought just enough to frame the conversation for today. And I think back to when the terms of reference were originally put together, and there had been 3 or 4 specific areas identified, one being red tape, one being tax policy, which we dealt with 2 or 3 weeks ago. 2 other ones were the capital budget and development charges. So I have a short presentation on each of these. I'll stop at the end of the capital infrastructure investments. There's a couple of recommendations for the committee's consideration, and we can have any discussion on capital budget before moving on to development charges. Under capital, we're going to talk a little bit about, just very high level, our capital program, some of the significant tender awards that have been provided so far this year. We'll look at some of the most significant projects over the next 3 years of our capital program, and we want to talk about both and Metrolinx Go infrastructure expansion, and you'll see why as we go through the slides. So overall, the region has a 10-year capital program approaching $5 billion. Most significantly, public transit, roads, water supply, and wastewater treatment comprise the majority of our capital program, as you can see on the left. And then from a funding perspective, as you've heard from previous capital budget presentations, we fund our program from tax-supported and user rate-supported reserves, from debt that's funded from future property taxes, future user rates, and future development charges, and grants and subsidies where they are available. We had provided a report to Administration Finance Committee back in May on our capital program, and some of the outcomes of that report, which are still valid today. Some of the initial restrictions in the early days of the pandemic really had minimal impact on the region's planned infrastructure projects. We had a couple of projects that were delayed for a very short period of time. The finding from that report was that 80% of our capital program was committed, either through existing tender awards or because we had funding arrangements with senior levels of government that required projects to be completed by a certain date. It's been a busy spring and early summer for tender awards. Council has approved tenders in excess of $200 million for construction and in excess of $20 million for vehicles and equipment to date in 2020. So our general message has been the vast majority of our capital program is continuing as planned. And importantly, at the bottom here, there's no regional infrastructure capacity constraints on planned development that we're aware of right now. And we went back and looked at the most recent water and wastewater monitoring report, which came through to council recently, which indicates that there's adequate capacity to accommodate all current development commitments. Now, we have having some ongoing conversations with the home builders, and they have, I think, a few projects that they want us to look at. And so that dialogue is continuing between our plan and engineering folks and the home builders to ensure we've got a common understanding. But our understanding is that there's nothing that's holding up planned development at this time. Some of the more significant tenders awarded in 2020. So most significantly, right back at the start of the year was the GRT bus maintenance facility up on Northfield Drive, $104 million tender. It's a $120 million project in total. And the contractor started right away following approval of that contract, and that work will continue over the course of about a 20 to 24 month period. Other projects, bulk wastewater treatment plant upgrades, a number of road improvement projects as well, ranging from 8 or 9 million up to $17 million. So these would be the most significant bids that have been approved so far this year. And when we look ahead to the next 3 years, what we've tried to do is just pick out the most significant projects, all of which are proceeding generally as planned. So you see Northfield here, Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan, significant addition to the capital program last year, following approval of that master plan in the fall of 2019. One of our next big ones coming up, 200 Frederick Street. This is the old courthouse, just down from the administrative headquarters. That tender is out right now, and we're anticipating to award relatively soon. The multimodal transit hub. So the 34 million here is based on the capital project as it stands, but we know that there's going to be significant increases to that project as we put the next capital program together. And then a series of significant water and wastewater projects kind of rounds out this list. And we continue to work and move toward tender issuance and approval for all of these projects currently. With respect to IKIP, so IKIP is the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. It has a couple of different streams. Most recently, we've had approval of the remaining projects on the public transit stream. Our point here, and you'll see when we get to the recommendation, our concern about IKIP, it's a substantial program. Some of the project approvals took a year to approve. So when we talk about economic recovery and the region being ready to get going with projects, I would say it's unfortunate that it took 12 months to approve some of these projects. And I think anything that the federal and provincial governments can do in order to expedite the approval process would be well received. Because we've now approved, I think, 15 or 16 projects. We'll have a number of additional projects that we'd like to apply for under the next intake, and we're hopeful that it won't take a year to get those projects approved. Similarly, on the communities and culture and recreation stream, council approved last fall applications for 6 projects totaling $24 million. That was in October and November of 2019. We still don't have an answer on those projects. So getting these publicly funded projects approved on a more timely basis would be extremely helpful. And then with respect to Go Service expansion, this has been a top priority for the business community here in Waterloo Region for some time now. The initial business case for the expansion was approved by Metrolinx in the fall. We're quoting here a report indicating the impact of a $50 billion investment, that overall would encompass 170,000 jobs. The importance here to us is there is a consultation, an online consultation happening right now that Metrolinx has undertaken that you can look at on the Metrolinx website. This is for stage 1 upgrades between along the Kitchener line, including passing lanes and switching systems and upgradings to track and crossings. This consultation. For a sec?
Michael Harris is trying to get in. He just texted me, so someone can look. There he is. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add, Carl's trying to get in as well.
Carl's been in for a while.
They're both in apparently.
And Karen just arrived as well. Joy.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Craig. Please continue.
Okay. So the important thing here is there's an opportunity to provide some advocacy, I think, to the province and to Metrolinx to complete this stage 1 work in order to be ready for 2A all-day Go service between Toronto and Kitchener. And so, Mr. Chair, our recommendations for you today, are as follows. First of all, following up on the report that we provided in May, basically, continue the planned infrastructure investments as set out in the capital program. It's a significant capital program. We're looking to probably spend in the $350 to $400 million range on capital this year. We have a $5 billion capital program over the next 10 years. A lot of infrastructure investments, both to accommodate growth and to deal with the approximately $7 billion worth of assets that we currently have that have to be renewed and rehabilitated and maintained in order to deliver services in the future. And then we think there's two pieces of advocacy that the committee could consider. One would be to request the provincial and federal governments to expedite approvals in the future for IKIP projects. When we make an application, we're basically ready to go. And to, have to wait 8, 10, 12 months for approvals is really awkward when we want to get some of this infrastructure in place. And then finally, to advocate to the province to approve the funding for the Kitchener GO Service expansion project. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one other comment on IKIP. We learned yesterday some of the details of a COVID-19 IKIP stream that was announced yesterday. We had initial announcement a couple of months ago, but got some more details yesterday, which we're exploring right now. And that's going to provide some targeted funding over the next year or so. So this is for, I'd say, relatively small projects because the projects have to be complete by the end of next year. Fortunately, we've already done a bunch of work at a staff level on this. We have a long list of potential projects, and we'll be going through that list relative to the information that we learned yesterday and bringing recommendations forward to council as soon as possible. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Craig. Very good report. And we do have some questions. I have several questions and comments as well. Councillor Kiefer?
Yes, thank you very much. I apologize for coming in late. I was having a little trouble getting on, but thanks for that presentation, Craig. And when you refer to the Kitchener GO Transit, do you mean Waterloo Regional GO Transit?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I think I'm just, so I'm going the wrong way here. I think we're just using the terminology that exists on the Metrolinx site. So I think they refer to the electrification of the Kitchener line, what they call the Guelph subdivision, as the line that would run between Guelph and Kitchener. So this is Metrolinx's language on their Engage site that we had a look at the other day.
Yeah, I thought that was the case, Craig. I'm wondering if we couldn't make sure that they refer to it as Waterloo Region instead of just Kitchener. We're talking about a GO transit system here, and it's not just all about Kitchener. And of course, we in Cambridge would like to have part of that action as well. Mm-hmm. So it kind of bothers me that it's referred to as the Kitchener GO transit, when in fact it should be Waterloo Region Transit. I don't know if you can do anything about that or not.
It's always going to be referred to as the Kitchener line.
Yeah, I think again, through you, Mr. Chair, because that's the location of the terminus of that line right now, that's just the language that they would use.
Yeah, I think, Craig, that for a long time our friends in Toronto have had a problem with geography and they just refer to KW and not the region of Waterloo. So I'm just wanting to bring that to light. It should be a matter of correction, I think, but whether they do it or not is another story. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Carl. And I think, in fairness, that's GO's terminology, not our terminology. So we kind of inherited that.
I get that, Sean, but we can re-educate them.
All right. Does anyone else have a question? Right. So I'm just wondering, maybe since the recommendation is on the screen, is Craig, in your report, you also talked about some proposals that we've submitted we haven't received responses from. So I'm wondering if we need to add not only SIP, but current funding applications we have not yet received a response on as well.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so absolutely, and careful look at the wording. I tried to actually be specific here to future transit stream projects and current community culture and recreation stream projects. So at this point, we have all of the projects that we applied for under the transit stream, we now have approval of. We have no announcement on any of the community culture and recreation stream. And it's actually not clear at this point whether there'll be a future community and culture recreation stream. That being said, if there's some tweaking to the language here that you'd like to see, then I think I totally agree with your intent.
Just maybe break it into two, so it's, because like I missed that when I read it. That's probably more on me than what the printed word says, but maybe we just make it into two. Request the provincial and federal government's expedite approval of future ISIP transit stream projects, and further, or also add a separate bullet, request that current communities, culture, and recreation stream projects where applications have been submitted have an expedited approval.
Certainly, that's easily done.
Okay.
Karen has her hand up.
All right. Karen?
Thanks. Can you hear me, Sean?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm fine. Hear you fine.
All right. I don't know about everybody else, but this link was really hard for me to get into, and I apologize because I was late getting to this meeting. But the ISIP funding, Craig, that you mentioned that's pandemic related, do you know what the funding ratios are? Like, is it going to be 50-50 federal, provincial, or is it going to, are we going to have some funds in order to access that stream of funding?
Yeah, it's a through you, Mr. Chair. It's a really good question. I think what we had heard previously was that there would be up to 80% funding from the federal government. What's not clear to me, because I just haven't had a chance to look through any of the documentation yet, is how the remaining 20% would be funded. So we'll look into that very shortly. And we do have, our intent is to send a quick email out to council before the end of the day today to just advise you of the general parameters of the program. And then we'll follow up with, there's a few things we need to understand. One is how the remaining 20% gets funded. We're trying to find out what the application deadline is going to be. The other thing we're a little bit concerned about is this isn't actually new money. This is repackaging existing IKIP money. And if you recall the previous conversations we've had about the transit stream, the region over the next 10 years has more than enough projects to use all of the funding for transit. So this program, might actually take away from the amount of transit funding that's available, but we're not certain about that yet. We're going to try to get those questions answered and then bring some recommendations forward to council on which projects we should apply for. And I would say there will have to be a streamlined approval process here, because if projects are going to have to be completed by December of 2021, then we have one construction season to get them done, which means we need almost immediate approval in order to get going on design, to be ready to tender in the winter, early spring, and get going as quickly as possible in the new year.
And if I could, just one comment, Chair Strickland. I really hope everybody was listening when Craig said that our projects are ready to go. So that this red tape and this delay is really at the senior levels of government. We've done our due diligence and we are ready to rock and roll. So maybe we should help them cut their red tape, Craig, and just say they should give all the money to Waterloo Region.
I'll leave that to the chair to comment on.
Well, I think we'll leave that as direction to staff to advocate on behalf of. Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment, though. So I'm just wondering, before we deal with the recommendation, Craig, if you could go back to the slide that shows our capital projects for the next 2 years, 2020 to 2022. Okay, so what I'm wondering is, first off, when we talked about Metrolinx and the recommendation to basically ask Go Transit to expedite the work and the approval process to get that project underway, does that have any capital implications for us? For example, Breslau Station, King Victoria Transit Hub, are there any capital implications for us with respect to Metrolinx and All Way, All Day Go that we may want to advance into the capital budget?
Good question. I don't necessarily have an intimate understanding of every one of these projects, but my gut feeling is probably not. We have, for example, the most significant one that's interregional transit related would be the multimodal transit hub. We have that relatively early in the capital program. Our intent, as the comments indicate, is to complete the design by the end of this year and have a tender plan for spring of 2021. So I don't think we actually have any real capacity to accelerate that project. And I think that's probably the only one of any significance that has an impact, that might be impacted by what Metrolinx does. And with respect to Breslau, there's still discussions underway about the funding of the Breslau station. So we're doing a little bit of work right now with our development charge consultant to understand the potential capacity to fund, if there was to be a regional contribution to that project, the extent to which that could be funded from development charges. So you'll be hearing more about that project probably in the last 2 quarters of this year. I don't see any other impacts at this point.
Okay, so thanks for that. So then also related to this slide is what I'm wondering, in terms of this committee's work and the discussion related to capital, is are there plans that are further out? Because we do a 10-year plan. So there are plans in 2029, for example, or 2028, or anywhere beyond 2022, that it might be more advantageous to advance them into the capital spending plan so we can get them going earlier than what they're currently planned to be under construction.
So I think a couple of comments. One is that, that's certainly something that we can look at. We're in the process right now, actually, of putting together the 2021 to 2030 capital program, and looking over, as we go through that process, looking to see if there is opportunity to accelerate. I would say that, for the most part, our capital program is based on, from an asset renewal perspective, it's based on our current understanding of, the condition of our assets, and, based on, the most opportune time to replace them. But we can certainly look at some of that timing from a growth-related perspective. Also, just trying to put a capital program together that, makes sense relative to the amount of growth that's happening at the region, and trying to manage growth-related capital costs appropriately through development charges and through long-term borrowing. So, that's certainly something that we can, a lens that we can view the updated capital program through, which we're working on right now.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I don't know if in terms of the next steps related to that. I'm just thinking out loud. So for example, if I was to say to you, and this is an unfair question, so if you don't have an answer, I get it. Like, what's the largest capital project we have planned for the next 10 years? Like, we just did Northfield Transit with the help of federal provincial government. That's a $100 million project. What's the largest project we have on the books for the next 10 years that you're aware of?
Well, I guess the two that come to mind, and I can't remember exactly, there's some significant wastewater treatment plant expansion. I think that's at the Waterloo site late in the program. The other significant one, which is out in the latter part of the capital program, would be Stage 2 LRT, which we're currently showing to be 100% funded by federal and provincial funding sources.
Right. So what I'm wondering is, those two examples, and the LRT is a much bigger question, of course, but, in terms of the multiplier effect of capital investments. So we look at it from an economic perspective, the multiplier effect of a multimodal transit hub at 34 million or greater is going to have a much greater multiplier effect in terms of jobs in the economy than like a $10 million road project, for example. So I'm just wondering if looking at it through that kind of lens, that we may be able to rejig or review the capital forecast going forward in terms of what's the greatest economic multiplier based on the region's capital investment.
Yep, understood. And I can take that back and bring that to the discussion as the capital program comes together.
So could you bring back that to the budget process then, Craig?
Yes, we can do that.
Does that make sense? I can't see the rest of the folks on the screen. Does that make sense to the rest of the members of the committee?
Great, doesn't stop sharing.
Is everyone nodding? Because I can't see the members of the committee.
Nodding.
Everyone's nodding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
They don't have their video on, so.
All right. Okay. All right. So that's it for the questions that I had. And if Mr. Dyer can bring back that analysis into the budget process, I think that would be helpful.
Oh.
All right. So we have a proposed, well, maybe we want to add it to the resolution. I'm just wondering, we want to add that to the resolution that staff review the capital, but the 10-year capital forecast with the lens of maximizing the greatest economic benefit. Just like that. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I don't have a problem with that.
And we want to add that to the recommendation, because then it's got to go to council.
I agree.
Can you say that again, please?
Okay, the clerk's asked me to say that again, so now I'm really on the spot.
Greatest economic.
Yeah, can we, and also direct staff to review the 10-year capital forecast and with a focus on prioritizing capital projects that deliver the greatest economic benefit and or multiplier. How's that? Okay, so we'll add that to those three. Does someone want to move that and second that?
Helen's moving.
Councillor Jowett will move it by Councillor Lawrence. All right, all those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thanks very much. All right, and Mr. Dyer, you're on again for development charges.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to be clear before I leave this slide, we'll take that middle resolution and split it into two as previously discussed.
That's right, yeah, and clerks has that noted as well.
Understood. Okay, great.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg. Great.
Okay, so now we'll just change topics and go to development charges. So a very brief background. As you know, the Development Charges Act prescribes the process that we follow to calculate a maximum permissible rate. And the Act provides certain statutory exemptions. And then council takes, the Act and the reg, and we do a background study. And then we put a development charges framework into place. So that includes the rates themselves, as well as any discretionary exemptions and discounts and area rating that council deems to be appropriate. We went through a significant review of development charge policies in the, let's say, the 18 months leading up to last June. Our current bylaw came into force, was approved in June of last year, came into force on August the 1st, and has a 5-year life as mandated by the Act. Current single detached rates, a little over 28,000 in the cities and about 26,000 in the townships, and a non-res rate at 16 in the cities and 14 in the townships. And of course, we have a 60% industrial discount. We have exemptions for remediated brownfields for the downtown core in Cambridge, and a new discount that was added this past time for qualifying offices in urban growth centers. So just, from the perspective of the home builders, at the public meeting that this committee held a few weeks ago, we had some input, some input from the home builders. We just pulled some of this language from the submission that was made. That their perspective at the time was that tax relief, more exemptions, and reductions to DCs aren't the answer and would only serve to prolong the economic impact on COVID-19. And so we looked at it. We tried to look at this through two lenses. One was there are certain things that the committee and council could do that would require a new background study and bylaw update. In other words, we'd have to go through the background study process and actually make an amendment to our DC bylaw. And this would be, doing anything from implementing rates other than what is already in place. We have an indexing requirement that will be upon us as of December the 1st, as do, I think, most, if not all, of the local municipalities in Waterloo region as well. So it's a mandatory indexing. If we wanted to do something different, we'd actually need to, again, do a background study, amend the bylaw. Alternatively, it's within council's, scope of authority, for lack of a better term, to introduce new or amend any existing exemptions and discounts. So some of the things to think about, some of the considerations is that, of course, it would require a new background study, a public process, and a new bylaw. Just a reminder that the existing bylaw is under appeal and remains so. And there's been very little movement on that appeal since it was since we were advised of it back in the fall. From a staff perspective, these types of options we would aren't recommended. They would obviously impact the ability to fund growth related infrastructure. And there's a sense right now that development is continuing. We saw some stats from Michelle Sergi, either in the previous meeting or the meeting before that showed that, at least on the residential side anyway, that residential development applications are still working their way through the system. And we've seen that, I think, with respect to our development charge collections over the last couple of months as well. So we don't see, from a staff perspective, we don't see either reducing the rate or providing more exemptions right now as viable or recommended options. And so we also then had a look at, well, what could what options are available working within the parameters of the existing bylaw? Is there any latitude, for lack of a better term, that that council has with respect to DCs working within the structure of the existing bylaw? And there were two items that came out of that conversation that we wanted to just share with the committee today. The first would be, councils have the ability under the Act to enter into what are called Section 27 agreements. And this is, in accordance with Section 27 of the Development Charges Act. It basically allows a development charge to be paid at a different time than contemplated in the Act. So, for example, development charges, generally speaking, are payable at the time of building permit. And you can enter into an arrangement to have a development charge paid at a different time. So that's one thing that could be looked at. The other one, which staff are working on right now, is an interest rate policy. And the reason we're working on an interest rate policy is that the Development Charges Act has recently been amended that does a couple of things. One, it freezes the determination of development charges at an earlier date, at the time of a site plan or zone change application. And municipalities have the ability, notwithstanding that the DC is frozen, we can add interest for that period, for a period of time, in order to, not be, overly impacted by the freezing. The other piece where this plays into is that there are deferred payments now for rental housing and for nonprofit housing. And this is where development charges are paid over a 5 or 6 year period, or over a 20-year period in the case of nonprofit housing. And municipalities have the ability to apply interest to the unpaid DCs. So looking at both of these, so first of all, the deferred payment arrangements hasn't been our practice in the past. Municipalities use Section 20 arrangements. It's not been part of our policy previously. If we were going to go down that road, we'd have to give some consideration to what types of development might be eligible. So, if we're looking to provide some relief, for lack of a better term, how we would target that relief. It does have an administrative process. And we've been trying over the last couple of bylaw updates to achieve as much consistency as possible between us and the local municipalities. This could create a little bit of misalignment. And to the extent that development charge collections are delayed, it does impact our ability to fund infrastructure. It would impact our cash flow, and of course would likely result in some additional debt financing as well. So again, this is at this point not something that staff would recommend. On the interest rate side, it'd be interesting to get some input from the committee today. So again, there's two times during the process that we're looking at. One is when the development charges are set initially, which used to be at the time of building permit, but now is much earlier, at the time of a site plan or a zone change application. And we can charge interest, in the time between the application date and the building permit date. And then also, as I said earlier, when DCs are paid. And this slide, the next two slides just try to describe that. So in this case, a site plan or zone change application received after January 2020, that's when the DC is set for that particular development. And we can apply interest on that rate during the approval process up until the time that the building permit is issued. From a payment perspective, where there are deferred payment arrangements that are mandatory now, this is for multi-residential and institutional development over 5 years and nonprofit over 20 years, we can apply interest to any amount that is that is not paid. So there are some policy options here available for council, which we're currently working on. We can apply the interest as permitted under the Development Charges Act, and we would need to figure out the mechanics of what rate would be used, when it would be applied, things like that. We could apply interest to certain specific situations or types of developments. We could defer implementation of any policy, or we could approve a policy of not applying interest at all. Some municipalities are working their way through this process. Some policies have already been implemented. As I said earlier, at the region, we're working closely with the local treasurers in an attempt to bring forward a consistent position to provide some clarity to the development community as we move forward with this policy. And the intent would be to bring something forward for council's consideration in the fall, perhaps as early as September. So I don't have a recommendation for you on this, and I would summarize the development charges piece. Given the extensive review that council went through, leading up to the new bylaw last August, we don't have any specific staff recommendations at this time. We are looking at, and we'll need to look at, given the changes in the Development Charges Act, when we think it would be appropriate to consider an update to the background study. So even though our bylaw is only a year old, the act has changed, our circumstances have changed, and we may not want to wait another 3 years before undertaking a new background study. And then, of course, we have a recommendation regarding the interest rate policy, which will come forward this fall. And certainly if there was any input from this committee today with respect to interest rate policy, that would be helpful. And that's something I could bring back to the area treasurers group. So, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude with that and turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Craig. Very much appreciated for all that information. And it's great to see our staff and area municipal staff looking at different ways in which they can respond to economic challenges we're going to be facing in the future. So I do have a couple of questions. Councillor Kiefer.
Helen?
Thank you, Chair. Craig, thanks for that information. My question has to do with clarification. When you were talking about development charge exemptions, and you mentioned the Cambridge core, and in Cambridge, of course, there's 3, if not 4 cores. So are we specifically geographically talking about Galt Core, or are we including Preston, Hespeler, and possibly Hespeler Road?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the policy approved by council last year, and as set out in our bylaw, is there's a downtown core exemption in all 3 downtown cores.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Jowett. Helen?
Thanks, through the chair. So, Craig, maybe you can help me with this, but I know how we're trying to get shovel-ready stuff moved forward, or really help things that are going to be low-hanging fruit for us and things like that. And so I heard about a community or municipality who started to engage in, I hope I've got this term right, minimum lot coverage as a trigger for more support to move the project forward. So I'm even thinking, when you speak of the interest rate thing, maybe that could even be another part of the criteria for this kind of incentive. If, say, somebody was going to get minimum, 40% lot coverage, that really helps us on the taxation side. But I thought, because it does help us on the taxation side, is it something that we could perpetuate as a trigger to give more support to move the project forward and everybody wins?
Mr. Dyer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll be right up front. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm wondering if Michelle has a perspective on the minimum lot coverage, and if not, it's a question that I could look into.
Michelle, do you have a response to that?
So through the chair, I think the challenge with minimum lot coverage is it's not necessarily recognizing, we'd have to look into it further, but it's not necessarily recognizing multi-story buildings or units. And so the applicability to non-res versus res is very different. And whether or not it will give you, clear on whether or not it would actually give you what you're looking for. Quite honestly, I think we just have to look into it a little bit further. I'm not sure that it would.
I'd be happy to know more about it, Michelle, because even the way I described it was pretty That's pretty bad, right? So, but I guess you could probably get better information to see if it's worth a second look.
Certainly, we can take a look at it, but there's a lot of variability in terms of coverage. But we'll certainly take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Chair Redmond, Karen?
Thanks, Sean. Craig, you were asking for some input on interest rates for DCs that are paid for over time. Does the proponent or the developer have the ability to pay it all at once were they to choose to do that? And I guess I'm just wondering, I've never had that question answered, so I don't know, it may be pending out there, but I'm just wondering, are we looking to cover our costs? Like, what would the interest rate, what would we set it at? Could it be a disincentive to people who are choosing between municipalities, whether they're going to go in Waterloo region or Peel region? So I guess I'm just wondering how the level of interest rate, do we know what other jurisdictions are doing at this time? And do we know if it's to cover cost or what is it predicated on?
Yep. So through Mr. Chair, I think there's a variety of different approaches that are taken. I think most commonly, the interest rate would be set at, for example, prime +1 or prime plus 2%, something like that. I would say, it's designed in part to try to keep, municipalities as whole as possible. So, as we think about the input that staff provided to council through the consultations on, I can't remember the bill numbers now, is Bill 108, and there's another one as well. Our concern about the deferred payment arrangements is that specifically on water and wastewater, we have to have the infrastructure in place before the development starts. And so, we've already issued the debt on that project. And then, to get a funding stream over, 5 or in some cases 20 years, the interest application would just help to deal with that timing difference and might in some cases prompt a developer to say, you know what, I don't want to pay this over 6 years, I'll pay it up front. And there is a mechanism to allow that to happen.
And so if I could just and thank you for that context, Craig. It seems to me that we should be as close to being kept whole as we can be. And that would mean that the cost of having debt, which changes over time, so that maybe this is something we also have to revisit because this will be over 6 years. But if the cost of borrowing goes up, I would hope that we're not at a disadvantage for exactly what you're saying, Craig. We've spent the money already, so we're just basically paying off the debt afterwards with development charges, right?
Right. And that, through you, Mr. Chair, that those are precisely some of the details we're trying to work through with the area treasurers right now, right? Both, you think about the mechanics of this. Well, what is the rate? When is the rate set? Is the rate adjusted over time? When does it apply? Like just the mechanics of how the calculation would work. That's part of what we're working through right now.
So thanks for that. I had a question related to that as well. And so when you say you're working through that, you're also obviously looking at the risk analysis of that and what increased exposure the region and the municipalities may have to risk of default due to deferral of a development charge.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. The delayed payments are concerning for us in terms of, and we expressed this concern during, while we were commenting on the draft legislation. We're concerned about our ability to collect the development charges in the future, especially after a change of ownership. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely a concern for us. So, trying to assess that risk and trying to model some of the financial impacts as well is part of the exercise we're going through right now.
Okay, and one other question I have, Craig, and I wasn't clear from the presentation. Like I understand the regulatory aspect development charges and how we have to do a background study. And if we want to make any substantive changes, we need to enter into a background study and set out a new timing and communicate that broadly and publicly. But why do you think, and this is a piece I missed, why do you think we would want to consider potentially reopening the bylaw before the 5-year period has expired for the current bylaw?
Well, there's potentially a number of reasons. So I have a list of them somewhere, but I'll try to go through some of the ones off the top of my head. So the first would be the act is now amended so as to eliminate the mandatory 10% discount. So you may recall on soft services, there was always this mandatory you had to take 10% of your costs off the top before calculating your DC. That's now gone. And so there's an opportunity to recover more soft service costs from DCs than there were before. There are additional categories of expenditure that can be included in the DC. We also have a situation, some situations where, if capital costs have come in at higher than was originally anticipated, then we have to be mindful of we're not collecting enough right now in DCs to fund the growth-related cost associated with the projects. And we want to be careful to not expose the region to significant risk of not being able to fund those growth-related costs. The interest that I just talked about, which we're going to try to do through a policy statement right now, at some point should probably have a home in the DC bylaw. So there's at least 4 reasons that might lead us to an early opening of the bylaw. And when I find the list, I'll send you the remaining items.
Okay, so thanks for that, and I really appreciate you looking after the financial interests of the region, but all those examples I heard there, we're really talking about the potential for increasing the development charge, and I'm not sure at this point in our economic recovery cycle that's something we really want to look at. From my perspective, and I understand from the finance perspective, and trying to fund capital as much as we possibly can from development charges. I get it, but when we got a maximum rate right now, what, 28 grand or something like that for the city, and 26 grand in the townships, I'm not sure we really want to embark on opening up the development charges bylaw in the next year in order to increase what those numbers are. I would suggest from my perspective that we need to let it play out a little bit and in all likelihood live with our current DC bylaw. That would be my view. I don't know if other committee members want to weigh in on that, but that would be my view.
Yeah, I would concur.
Is that Councillor Harris?
It is, yes.
Okay. All right. So, but I get where you're coming from, Greg. I get where you're coming from. I get it 100%.
If I may, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that input and feedback. And, it's certainly not something that, that we were expecting or planning to recommend in the immediate future. It's just something we need to monitor, right? Okay. From a risk perspective. And so, for example, if we as the region accelerated the timing of significant growth-related projects that required the issuance of significantly more debt, there's a circumstance under which we may want to look at the calculation of the rate. Otherwise, we'd have to figure out, okay, if we're going to accelerate this project and we don't have the DCs to pay for it, we need to make sure we have a funding source to pay the capital costs. And so my point is there's many variables to be taken into account, and we'll keep council updated on those variables.
Okay. Great. Thanks very much, Craig. I don't see any other questions from committee members. So thanks very much for that today, both on the capital budget and the development charges. Very much appreciated. And as I said from the onset, on the development charges front, I'm really pleased to see you and your staff and the area municipalities looking at ways in which we could build some flexibility into the development charges collection of bylaw without reopening the bylaw. So I really appreciate that.
Okay, thanks
very much. Okay, moving on to the next part of the agenda, other business. And last meeting, we asked Michelle if she would be kind enough to draft a draft resolution for us to take a look at with respect to expediting some planning approvals. And Michelle has just kindly shared the screen. Michelle, you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sorry, I've just lost the ability to get rid of my mute button, so I'm hoping you can hear me now.
We can hear you fine, yeah?
Good. So this draft resolution essentially follows the one slide that I shared at the last ad hoc committee meeting that speaks to the elements of Planning Act applications that I've been working on with the area municipalities in terms of expediting. So the first sort of 4 clauses sort of speaks to the rationale for providing the motion. Did you want me to go through each one? Did you want me to read them out loud?
If you can maybe just center your screen a little bit. We can't see the 4th bullet. If you can just kind of move it up a little bit. Oh, now it's gone.
That's a little too much.
You trying to tell us something, Michelle?
Tell her if she reduces it to 75%, it will show up better.
Okay, maybe if you reduce it to 75%, Stevie's suggesting.
Again.
Okay, can we see it now?
Yeah, we can see it. And I think the first 4 paragraphs, those whereas is fantastic. I don't think we need to discuss those unless someone on the group wants to. I think it's the 5th paragraph, which is the kind of the meat of the resolution. Maybe you can speak to that.
Okay, so maybe I'll read it out. Therefore, be it resolved that regional staff be directed to continue to work with the area municipalities to identify and expedite Planning Act applications that will facilitate the development of shovel-ready lands, unlock critical infrastructure, prioritize holding provision clearance, and prioritize the registration of draft plans of subdivision and condominiums throughout the COVID and post-COVID economic recovery period. So that's the section dealing specifically with expediting development applications.
Okay.
In addition, there's further that regional staff continue to work with the area municipal staff to identify opportunities to streamline the development approvals process. So as I continue to have discussions with the area municipal heads of planning on a weekly basis, if we identify other areas where we could expedite projects, this would capture that as well. In addition, we're working on a joint area municipal Lean Six Sigma process on official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment process, looking for efficiencies in a collaborative way. And so that sort of recognizes that process is ongoing and we're going to continue to work on those types of initiatives. And finally, that regional staff continue to update the ad hoc committee on labor force data, building permit and development activity on a monthly basis. So that goes back to the statistics that I provided during our last presentation and committing to bringing those to the committee on a monthly basis so that you're able to keep an eye on sort of what's going on with the local economy.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. That's a very good resolution. You may have a career in politics, but I'm not sure I would wish that on you. But very good resolution. Thanks. So any questions from or comments? This is in our hands. If we want to amend it or change it, it's entirely up to us. Any questions or comments for everybody? Anybody?
Carl.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chairman. Sean. Thanks for that, Michelle. I was wondering, does the Perry group that Craig Dyer described or we were looking into, how do they fit into this, into your resolution? Or do they?
So through the chair, I hadn't included them directly in terms of the resolution, but they would still fall within that second component that talks about streamlining the development approvals process. I do believe that there's some opportunity through that development tracking system to find some fairly significant efficiencies.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that because, and I'm wondering, you know, like they've obviously worked with other municipalities, regions where they've been successful. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this could work or will work. Thanks.
Michelle, would we consider, or could we consider a separate resolution on that area group? Because we have previously approved something related to that, have we not, as a council?
Through the chair, I don't believe that we've approved anything directly. What we could do is closer to them completing their work, we could commit to bringing the recommendations to the committee for their consideration.
I think that'd be good. Does that work for you, Carl?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. All right. And then, Michelle, I'm wondering when I look at that paragraph there, regional staff be directed to continue to work collaboratively with area municipalities to identify and expedite planning applications. Well, I'm wondering, you know, how is that different than what we're doing right now? Because, you know, we had talked about prioritizing applications that would create the greatest economic benefit and, you know, take maybe a different lens, a different look at some of the applications. How is that sentiment captured in the resolution?
So I think to a certain extent, to answer the first part of your question in terms of how is it different from what we normally do on a normal basis, if there's an application that needs to be expedited, usually there's communication between myself and one of the heads of planning. And they say, Michelle, this is a priority. Can you please expedite? And we do what we can. This is speaking to the fact that right now we're doing a very concerted, conscious process in order to identify those applications. Right now, we're meeting on a weekly basis. We're talking about applications that could be expedited.
We lost your feed.
Oh, sorry.
Nope.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, so it's speaking to sort of the process that we're using right now to identify those applications that are closest to building permit. And so it was an attempt to recognize that as part of the economic recovery and things that are important, you know, from continuing to move construction industry forward on a whole variety of levels. So it wasn't necessarily that just a specific type of application would move forward. In talking to the area municipalities, we decided that sort of the shovel ready was the key component because each of the area municipalities has a very different approach in terms of what they feel should be expedited globally. So for example, some municipalities really prioritize affordable housing and others really want to prioritize employment type uses. And so what we decided was, you know, we can do both if they're close to shovel ready.
Okay. All right.
So that's partially why we.
All right. That helps me understand it a lot more. Okay. Perfect. Great. Thanks. So I don't see any other questions or comments on that. So can we have a mover and seconder with thanks to Michelle? Moved by. I can't see the screen. Sorry.
Sue.
Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by. Oh, there we go. Councillor Jowett. All those in favor? That's carried. Great. Thank you very much.
Carl has his hand up.
Carl, you got a question?
Oh, no, that's okay.
Okay. All right. Any other items of other business? Next meeting. Do we have a next meeting scheduled?
Nope, that's up to the committee.
Do we have an agenda for the next meeting? What is outstanding right now for us to look at? Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we tentatively schedule a meeting for another 2 weeks from today? And I'll regroup with Craig and Rod and see where we're at on what is remaining for us to do. If that works for everybody.
It's council day, just so you know.
Sorry?
We have council that night.
We have council on the Thursday.
April 20th.
What about the week after then?
That's
27th? So we have council on the 20th, so why don't we schedule this for the 27th?
We don't have council till 7 at night.
Yep.
Oh, you want to do it during the day then?
Yeah, that's what we're doing now.
The only thing is, on the 27th, have we confirmed this regional planning thing that we were going to do with the new CAO? And that potentially was on the 27th as well, right?
We're talking the 20th, aren't we? We're
Is that
talking
now firm for the 14th? The one we just did a doodle pool on recently.
Yeah, so why don't we stay away, the 20th, why don't we target the 20th, 1 o'clock on the 20th? Okay?
Sounds good to me.
All right. And Craig, if I could ask you maybe to have Jennifer reach out to me and coordinate with Rod and let's set up a call with the three of us for sometime in the next week. Please and thanks.
Certainly.
Great. Thanks a lot. Okay, well, I just want to say that I really appreciate the work that staff have put into this and the presentations that come forward. And I think that these have been very beneficial discussions. And I think we're having an opportunity to move the bar a little bit here. And I think we're doing some good work. So thanks to everyone for your participation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, great.
motion to adjourn.
Thanks,
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Councilor Kiefer, Foxton, Lawrence, and Jowett. All those in favor? Approved. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.